notion of what blackness is about, all right? And that becomes a problem in itself. And by the way, when we finish the talk, there'll be plenty of time for questions if people have questions. So please hold on to them, and I'll answer some of those questions for you. So this idea, we shall overcome. Well, the question is, did we overcome it all? Okay? And some examples of, like Eduardo Bonilla-Silva, I'll talk about later, talks about that racism still exists today. Okay? When people say that racism doesn't exist anymore, he says we practice what's called colorblind racism. Okay? It's this form of racism that's different. It's built into ideological units as opposed to just individual hearts, okay? That it's just built into the system itself. It's really difficult to get over, right? So up here, this first person talked about, does anybody know who this is?
Oscar Grant.
Oscar Grant, okay? So Oscar Grant was a young man who on New Year's Eve of 2009 was going out to a party, right? There's actually a movie documentary made about his life that's either came out or is coming out soon. And what happened was that I guess he was going to drive, and his mom said, "It's New Year's. Why don't you take the subway?" Right? So he got on the subway. He gets into a fist fight with somebody on the subway. Now there's videotape of this. You can still see it on YouTube because nowadays everybody has a camera, right? So the police are there to break up the fight, so everybody starts videotaping, and they're videotaping it, and there's this, what they show is that Oscar Grant is lying face down, okay, face down, on the subway tracks, right? Or on the subway tracks, but on the side, right? And there's an officer who's kind of straddling but standing above him. And Oscar Grant, you can see him looking back and yelling at the officer. So he's probably not yelling, "Have a nice day," all right? But he's yelling at the officer. And all of a sudden, for some unknown reason, this officer, his name is Johannes Messerly, he sits there and he steps back from Oscar Grant, pulls out his gun, and shoots Oscar Grant in the back. This handcuffed man who's lying face down, okay? Kills Oscar Grant at that point, right? And Messerly gets tried and gets found guilty, okay, of manslaughter, not murder, okay? But he ends up doing 2 years where he ends up only serving 7 months for it. He got out in 7 months for killing Oscar Grant, a handcuffed victim. Now, he sits there and he makes this excuse, right? He sits there and he says, "I thought I was pulling out my taser, not pulling out my gun," all right? Now, one, I worked law enforcement, as he said, as Gus said, for 10 years, okay? So you get like weapons training and stuff like that, and they teach you like the difference between the weights of pepper spray and tasers and so on. There's a different way, they say, for LAPD, there's to pull out their gun with their taser, just so they don't make that mistake. But here's the question. What was Oscar Grant doing in the first place to get tasered?
He's handcuffed, nothing.
Nothing. He's face down, okay? This isn't an action flick, people. It's not like Oscar Grant all of a sudden is going to do some wheelhouse kick, knock these two officers down, jump up in the air, kick the two of them with the scissors kick, and then run off with his handcuffs behind his head and then jump over his hands and stuff and say, "Ha ha ha, I've gotten away," all right? It's not going to happen, okay? He's subdued at this time. There's no excuse for shooting him and killing him. But this happens in 2009. This gentleman right here, this is a picture of when he was younger, when he first came back from war. I think he was in Vietnam. His name is Kenneth Chamberlain. Okay, he's an ex-Marine, right? Now, how many of you have heard this case, Kenneth Chamberlain? Yeah, there's a few of you, okay, that have heard that. Most of you haven't heard about this case, okay? This was even more egregious. Kenneth Chamberlain, well, not more egregious because he wasn't handcuffed, but Kenneth Chamberlain was, I think, 67 or something like that. He was a senior citizen. And what happened was his life alert accidentally went off, okay? He had rolled over and accidentally went off. Now, life alert, I guess they have this little box that's on there. And it starts talking to you. "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And it can also hear you, right? So Kenneth Chamberlain, when he wakes up, because at first he doesn't wake up, so Life Alert calls the police and they call the ambulance, right? Even though it says it's a medical emergency, that's what they do, is they call the police and the ambulance if you're not answering. So, eventually he wakes up and he tells them, "Oh yeah, I'm fine," right? So they call the police and the ambulance and say, "He's fine." The police get there and they're like, "I don't care that he's fine," okay? They go to his door, they start banging on his door, demanding to get in. Kenneth Chamberlain says, "You don't need to come in, I'm okay, all right? Just leave, I want you to leave," right? Now what the police didn't know was the Life Alert thing was still on, recording, okay? So they hear all this, and they got all these recordings of what's going on, and at one point, the police officer, and also on their tasers, right? If you turn on the taser, a camera with a microphone goes on automatically, right? They decided they were going to go in, and at one point, Kenneth Chamberlain says to the Life Alert people, he goes, "My name is Kenneth Chamberlain, this is my last will and testimony. They're about to come in here and shoot and kill me." And sure enough, they did. Okay? Now, they opened the door slightly where they could see Kenneth Chamberlain. They said that they shot him because he had a knife in his hand. But the problem was when the taser, where they showed the taser go up on him, there's no knife in his hand. There's nothing in his hand. He's in his underwear, and that's it. So there's no knife, like they said, right? The guy, one of the officers tells the other officer, "Turn the taser off." And what they meant was the camera. And he turned the camera off at that point. They tased him at first, and then they shot and killed him. All right? His niece was in the hallway, by the way, when this happened. They also said something to him, too. At one point when he said, "Go away, I want you to go away," they said, "We don't care what you want, nigger." Okay? That's what the police said with black people sitting in the hallway listening to this, and it being recorded on Life Alert, right? There have been no charges filed against that police officer who did this to this day. Okay, they did take it before a grand jury, and the grand jury said, "Sorry, don't have enough evidence," and they let the person go. Okay, you go on to Trayvon Martin, who was shot and killed. How many of you have heard of Trayvon Martin? Okay, many of you. Okay, I've heard of Trayvon Martin. Okay, shot and killed by George Zimmerman. Right. When he had no weapons on him, the police told him stop following the guy. He did not break off following him, and so on. And ended up shooting and killing him. Now, one of the things I want to, one more thing I want to sit there and say, who is this right here? Supposed to be Obama, right? You can find tons of racist images of Obama on the internet that are just like this. One's with him with bones through his nose, looking like a witch doctor, calling it Obamacare, and all this other stuff. And there's another one where this one guy's wearing a shirt that says "Obama is my slave," and so on. There's like a variety of different images you can find. This other one, these Orange County women, when he first got elected, before he even took office, they created this thing called Obama Bucks, which looks like if the president has their name put on a dollar bill and stuff, or their face put on a dollar bill, but they had fried chicken, watermelon, and Kool-Aid on the thing. And then they try to say it wasn't racial. But the thing is, when people say that racism's dead, I always tell them, just look at the internet. If you look at some of these stories about Oscar Grant and about Trayvon Martin and about Kenneth Chamberlain, I remember looking at the ones about Oscar Grant. What I look at is the comments people make afterwards. And I remember one of the comments that struck me most about the Oscar Grant case was, if those people, who do they mean those people? So, black people, me, right? If those people would just learn to keep their mouths shut, and do what the police tell them, they wouldn't get shot. Is that the police's job to shoot you for mouthing off? Which ordinance does that violate for you mouthing off? And where does the ordinance say the punishment for that is a police officer will shoot you in the back or handcuff? No, of course not, right? But it goes to kind of this racialized notion that we have of African American men to this day, where we think that most black men are thugs and criminals and so on, right? Even some of the young black brothers on this campus get stereotyped by sometimes security and stuff, where they'll be pulled over to the side and searched. When I was at USC, just recently, there was 2 young men who were walking onto the campus and the police stopped them and they said, "What do you have to do here?" And they go, "No, let me just walking through and stuff." They said, no, you're not going to walk through here. Go out, go back out that way. Now, some of you say it's a private college, right? But it's also an open college, which means it's supposed to be open to the public. Now, they didn't stop me, or maybe because I'm a little more light-skinned, I don't look like I'm from South Central and stuff, because maybe I was dressed a little differently or whatever, okay? But they didn't stop me. I saw them once pull over a bunch of little black kids who were riding their bike through campus, right? 3 black kids were riding their bike through campus. They were little. They were like 9, 10 years old, right? They had them handcuffed on the sidewalk, okay? Just to sit there and, harass them a bit. I've been harassed by the police often as well with no charges filed, all right? So this is kind of like the living that African Americans live through today, the racism African Americans live through today, okay? So let's talk about how films change. I did a paper, one of my first papers that I ever did, okay, was called Black Exploitation Film Today that I presented. I was an undergraduate at Cal State LA, and I turned it and I presented. I read it years later, I thought, whoa, this is really a crappy paper. But it had some good ideas in it, because one of the things I talked about is that black exploitation film is not dead, okay? Like Bonilla Silva says, it's just changed. this exploitive view of black lives lives today. One of the things I brought up then was the absolute first movie ever made about the civil rights movement. The first movie that was made about the civil rights movement was this one right here, okay? And it's called Mississippi Burning, okay? You see these two guys right here? They're the two lead characters. What's wrong with that picture?
There's a burning cross in the background.
Hey, I don't have the problem with the burning cross.
Two white.
I got a problem with the two white guys about the first word about the civil rights movement. How are you going to hijack our movement? We did all this work and then you just stole that shit. I know how the indigenous feel because we stole their fucking continent, all right? But now they stole our civil rights movement. It's a smaller theft, but it's still a theft at the same time. These are two fictitious, they never existed, FBI characters who risked their life to solve the murder of Goodman, Cheney, and Brown. Now, this is fictitious because the FBI was no friend of the movement. They were following around Martin Luther King trying to prove that he was cheating on his wife and stuff, and a communist as opposed to the idea of solving cases like this. The next movie about the civil rights movement is this one right here, Goes to Mississippi. Oh look, there's a black woman actually in the picture. All right, Whoopi Goldberg. She plays the wife of Medgar Evers. Does anybody know who Medgar Evers is?
Yeah.
All right. Medgar Evers is the slain civil rights worker, right? He gets killed and stuff. So that person next to her is Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin plays the attorney who risks career and life to bring the murderer of Medgar Evers to justice. Now, Whoopi Goldberg's in the movie, but not in the movie much. I think in the whole movie she has maybe 10 lines. One of them, she doesn't even say anything. Alec Baldwin calls her to tell her he's still working on the case, don't give up. She said, you just see her on the phone. That was it, okay, and so on, right? So, and then we have this movie over here, Crash, okay, right? First, like people like touted this about this amazing movie about racism, right? And so on, and it makes some very good points in the movie. But there's something I always want people to notice about this movie. In this movie, there's only one character you get to know a whole lot about their personal life, okay? And which character is that? Yeah, right there. What do you get to know? Those of you seen the movie, what do you get to know about him? He's a racist. Remember, he feels her up and stuff, and then something magically comes upon her in a car wreck and saves her life, okay? But what do you get to know about his personal life? Do you remember?
His father.
What about his father?
His father lost his job to affirmative action.
Yeah, it was a racist, asshole, violent abuser. Makes you feel a little more sympathetic to him a little bit. Oh, I see now. I understand. All right. There's something these three movies have in common, okay? And it goes to this criticism that Bell Hooks, a very famous English professor and a very famous feminist theorist, talks about. Bell Hooks talks about Spike Lee's movies, and at one point she sits there and says that this one movie, Crooklyn, right? The people who were the reviewers of the movie sat there and said that Crooklyn was a horrible movie that didn't have a plot, okay? And Bell Hooks said, of course it had a plot. Now she's an English professor, who's well known all over the world, right? She knows what a plot looks like, right? So she sits there and she says, of course it had a plot. The plot was a movie about a mother dying, okay? And the family and how they're dealing with it. What these reviewers, she said, should have said is it didn't have a plot that white people will care about, okay? There's this thing where a lot of times when they create movies with this concept that we need to bring in a white audience. But you're not going to want to see a movie that just sits there and points fingers at white people and sit there and say, racist, 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 racist. You fucking racist, all out there. All right, and so on. So what do? You get to have a character that turns around, gets to save the woman, did something good. You get to have a character that sits there and possibly, is a little more nuanced than the other characters, so at least you understand why they're bad. Or you get to see white people who literally are risking their lives for those black people. Now, do these people exist? Absolutely. But why make the first movie about the civil rights movement about them, as opposed to all the black people who risk their lives for their own freedom? Okay? So, it's one of the things they didn't point to. You move on a little bit later, you have this movie called Baby Boy. And part of black exploitation film today is getting black directors to sit there and make racial stereotypes about black people. And this is a man named John Singleton who graduated from USC. I made a vow after seeing Baby Boy, if I ever see John Singleton, I will whoop his ass. Just kidding, I don't believe in violence, but I will give him a piece of my mind, okay, and so on. But it's a horrible movie that kind of stereotypes all black men as being criminal, okay, and so on in the movie. There are no good black men. The best black man in the movie is Ving Rhames. Ving Rhames just got out of prison, okay, and so on, right? And Ving Rhames helps the character cover up a crime at the very end, right? Some of the movie doesn't even make sense because the black women are all amazing. They all work hard and everything else and stuff. And the one black woman who's Tyrese's girlfriend, for some strange reason, which is unexplainable, she remains pen pals with Snoop Dogg, and everybody in the audience is like, oh shit, that's a mistake. Don't do that, girl. Except her. She's smart too, but for some reason in this case, she's not so smart because this creates the tension at the end of the movie, right? Then you have the movie up here, Brooklyn's Finest, okay? And so on, right? Now, how many of you seen that movie? Oh yeah, that movie was ugly, okay? Now, I won't give away too much of it, but the movie starts in the very first scene showing this white guy killing this drug dealer and stealing his money. And you find out later the white guy's a cop, okay? You also find out why he's doing this. He's doing this because his wife is pregnant, okay? And she has like, I think, severe case of asthma, if I get it right, and stuff like that. And they need to move because there's asbestos in their house, and he's been promising his two sons that they get their own room and stuff, so he needs a bigger place. And the police officers in New York only make $20,000 a year. Bullshit. But the thing is, of course, I don't think there's a police officer in this country that makes $20,000 a year, okay, and so on. You know, that's less than $2,000 a month. Nobody gonna want to do that job for that, okay, and so on. So, but the thing is that they're saying he doesn't make enough money. Now, the problem with this movie is, then they show the African Americans who are criminals, right? And the African Americans and criminals, you don't get to see their family lives and why they're doing this. They just look like a bunch of animals running around with no shirts, raping women, forcing them into slavery, this kind of thing. This kind of justifies why that white police officer is killing. Fuck, they're just animals. Put them down. Put them down. Some of you might have thought the same thing about that guy, what's his name, Dorner?
Yeah.
He's just an animal. Put him down.
They did though.
Yeah. And see, that's why it ends up justifying that in a lot of people's heads, right? And so on. And then, of course, there's the Medea films with Tyler Perry. I can't say much about them because I've never seen them. I refuse, okay? And so on, yeah. I refuse, okay? One, I'm not into films that kind of make fun of this kind of cross-dressing between men and women and stuff and then exploit that and so on. Also, I know that the films are heavily Christian-based with these messages that all you need is Jesus and everything will be okay, and so on. And it's not that simple. And then the last movie, which came out also this year, was Lincoln. And there was a historian that pointed out that there's a lot of inaccuracies about the movie, okay? Like, for instance, Lincoln wasn't into all freeing the slaves all the time, okay? At one point, he even made a statement that Howard Zinn talks about where he sat there and said, if I could, he was an abolitionist in his personal life, but he said as president, he needs to represent the country. So he said, if I can free the slaves to save the Union, I would free the slaves. But if I could keep the slaves to save the Union, I would keep the slaves. But one thing I didn't know that this historian who was criticizing the movie points out that they don't talk about in the movie is that one, Lincoln didn't want to free the slaves right away. Okay, Lincoln's idea was to free the slaves 30 years later at 1900. Okay, and so like 35 years later or something, 1900. Okay, he said it'd be a gradual freeing process where then you could also pay back the slave owners on their way compensation. He also believed that these freed black people should not stay in the United States. He was trying to work out a treaty with England, with Britain, to send them to the Cayman Islands or something, okay, and then to Panama at one point to work on the canal. But it fell apart because the English were like, they were kind of afraid, they said, that the South might win, and then if the South wins, the South's going to be pissed off that they took some of their property, okay, and so on. So they decided, you know, we're not going to do this, we don't want a part of this, and the whole thing kind of fell apart. Now, this doesn't mean that in Lincoln's personal life, Lincoln wasn't an abolitionist, right? But it also means that he didn't necessarily believe in the equality of all black people either, okay? Because he maybe didn't want to live amongst them as free men, okay, and so on. All right, oh, excuse me. All right, so moving on a little bit from the film, let's talk a little bit about our history. Okay, oops, sorry. This title, that was awfully one-sided. I'll explain it a little bit more in a second, right? It came from seeing the movie Django Unchained, right? But when we talk about slavery in this country, we often kind of whitewash this view of history, okay? We kind of water it down to really not talk about how insidious slavery was. And it was an insidious thing. And part of the reason we don't want to talk about it is the majority of our first presidents were slave owners, okay? In fact, I was looking it up, and I was trying to find how many weren't. And it seems like the only two that I found that weren't initially out, like the first 12 were the Adamses, John Adams and John Quincy Adams, okay? I don't know if they were related and stuff. I guess they didn't believe in slavery. In fact, recently I remember that when they were talking about when these elections, the nastiest elections of all time, this one historian said, no, the elections between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were much worse. He goes, John Adams accused Thomas Jefferson of selling his own children. What do you mean by that?
Because he had babies with Sarah.
Yeah, he had not just Sally Heming. See, this is from a movie, right, that they made into a black and white movie, but it's from a color era. It wasn't that long ago, maybe about 10 years ago, right? Where it shows this romantic, quote-unquote, relationship between Thomas Jefferson and his slave, Sally Heming, okay, and so on, right? Now, I brought this up in a class once where the professor was talking about this romantic relationship, and I used quotes around the word romantic, right? And I sat there and I said, Thomas Jefferson was a rapist.